All right, and we're back. And it's COMP392, and it's week 3, lesson 3, part 2. We had that weird glitch where everything kind of zoned out for a bit. And I fixed my problem. It looks like this now. And the only thing that I had as a problem, I had a bit of a glitch, was at the bottom here, this GUI.add had to be kind of commented out because in my add control, I'm not really adding any controls right now. So it should be empty, right? So what I'm actually getting is a control that's empty. And if I go back to my scene, you can see that there's a control here, but it's just a placeholder for me. I'm going to add some controls in a second, right? Okay, so cool. So I've got my cube. It looks like this. Let me upload to GitHub or update GitHub for you so you can see what I see. So I'm going to click on my Git. I'm going to go to my changes, and I'm going to say updated project to show cube on plane. This was what I did, right? And then kind of click this, go here and push. And now if you want to go up on GitHub, if you can compare my code with yours to make sure that you get what I get. Okay, so that there's no one has any issues. Okay, cool. So that's one. We still have a problem. And the problem that we have, it's a very small one though. The problem we have is our lights are out of place. If I want to look at Blender, and let's make some changes to Blender so it looks almost the same. One thing that I have in Blender is I don't have a material. I'm going to, on my cube in Blender, just to make it look the same, I'm going to go to my diffuse. And I'm going to pull it over to the side here so it's like very, very green. And I'm going to change this to 0. So I'm just going to, kind of go into my slider here and slide it all the way up. So it's the same green that I'm seeing. I have some other things too. I have some specular views. We'll talk about specularity later on in 3JS and how to get that. For now, I'll leave it as is. And my plane is kind of this gray plane. I want to make it brown, right? So, and we'll talk about the brown that I'm going to make it. So I'm going to right click on my plane. I'm going to add a new material for my plane. And I'm going to click my diffuse. And I'm going to go into this brown area. And if I want to be exact, okay, so I want to get this kind of more of a brown color. See if I can get the more of a reddish brown. Maybe there, like that, like a light brown. And I want to get the hexadecimal values. So let me show you that again. It's E7 9B61. E7, is that 9B? Yeah, E7 9B61. So E7 9B61. So how do I do that in with 3JS, right? Well, here's my plane geometry, and here's my Lambert color, and I put that in here, E7 9B61. So let's try that first. E7 9B61, right? So that's my color that I've chosen, a brown color that I've chosen here for the plane in 3JS. And I'll transpile, and I'll wait, and I'll go back up here, and I'll refresh, and we should get that brown plane, yeah? So it looks like kind of this brown color now. Okay? Brown plane, green cube. Still, we see that there's a shadow here that's pretty pixelated, by the way. But the shadow here is coming from a spotlight that's over here in the corner somewhere. And I don't mind the spotlight, but I want to kind of put the spotlight in my scene and control it a little bit more, right? And notice how I'm casting shadows, but the shadow that I'm getting right now is this squarish kind of shadow, right? My spotlight is really big. It's taking up this entire space. And my background ambient light is making my scene really bright, which is cool. But my shadows, my light's coming from this direction, my spotlight, right? I don't have a spotlight in Blender. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Go back to Blender. I have a point lamp, right? My point lamp is like an ambient light for us. It's like an area light or an ambient light. And it's in Blender. And the way to see this properly is my shading system that I'm using in Blender is multi-texture right now. Under my shading, I want to change from multi-texture to GLSL, right? That's the way we can match it up. So I'm going to change multi-texture to GLSL. And notice how I'm using solid mode to see Blender. And what I want to look at is, here, this right here, solid mode, the solid shader. I want to look at this with my material shader to see almost like this shape. So I'm not quite getting everything that I'm going to get from Blender. I have this little shine that's going on here on the plane because I've chosen this ambient light, this point lamp, which is slightly different than what we're getting. And I'm getting a shadow back here, but I'm not really getting a shadow this way. So let's add another lamp just to see something very similar, right? And I'm going to press Shift A, and I'm going to go to lamp, and I'm going to add in a spotlight. Now, if you notice my spotlight, I zoom out for a second, and well, I can't see it, right? Where is it? Okay, where's my spotlight, right? Notice if I leave the scene, it started at the origin, right? So what I want to do is I can put my spotlight so it kind of matches the scene. So I'm just going to pull it up here. And all I've done, just to rotate to see where I've pulled my spotlight so that it's right on top of the scene. Now we're seeing a spotlight from an angle. And how to do that? If I want to look at it from an angle, I'm going to zoom in for a second. I'm going to get rid of this, right? And I'm going to get rid of this with a T button, right? Notice how the spotlight is right here, but I want to look at the view. I'm just using the menus right now for the view. I'm going to make this orthographic for a second to help me model the light. I'm going to go to view, and I'm going to look at from the front. So here's my front. So see that the plane now is flat, and the light is right above it. This is where the light comes into the plane. I want to move this so it's to the right, so across the x-axis, right? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate this thing here so it points at the light. And I can do that by pressing the R button here in Blender and rotate it by hand so that it's angling towards the light. So it's not exactly dead on. What I'm going to get now is this kind of other thing going on, right? It's my spot lamp. And if I kind of come in or move it anywhere around, undo, some parts of it will be shaded a little differently. Okay, so that's how it's going to look like. It's off at an angle. Let's go from the front again. So again, if you wanted to use the numpad, it would be numpad 1, right? And I'm going to go to the right, which would be, again, if I go numpad 3, it flips it to the right now. I'm going to, even my right side, as an example, you notice how I'm dead on, right? So I'm actually hitting this light from the dead on from the right side, which is kind of cool. I'm going to center it just a little bit more, maybe just to the right a little bit. And from the top, if I want to see the light from the top, view, and I go top, which is numpad 7. Here it is from the top. You know what? I think I want to put it even more at an angle, but in the corner more. So I'll kind of put it up to here, right, in the corner. And notice how there's more light over here and less light over here. And I want to angle this one so it's pointing over here. How can I do that from the top? Press R to rotate and rotate it towards from the top angle. So I'm kind of pointing at it. Let's see from the side again. So for view, right side, not quite, right? Didn't quite make the cut there. So from the right side, it's rotate and again towards the object. And now as I look at it, what I'm trying to do here is rotate it so I have the exact, see I just missed it. Let's go from the front again, view from the front. Rotate in there, that's good. And notice how I have the shadow, but my lamp is way up here. And my lamp size is another thing. My lamp size, my spotlight is quite large, right? If I made this smaller or I came closer, the distance wasn't so big, then you'd see a smaller light. Okay, but you see the shadows are what I like to have. So this is how I kind of set up my lighting the way I want. Okay, cool. Let's go back to perspective mode in Blender. You go view, and then you would hit the 5 key, numpad 5, or view ortho perspective. So it turns it back into perspective mode. So now it looks more of a three-dimensional view. And I'm going to zoom in here so you can see what I want. This is the view, and I'm going to see that there's a bit of a cut here in Blender because of the size of the lamp. It's not going to be accurate. It's not going to be 100% the same, but very close, right? And this is the size. I want to go back to my camera view. So I'm going to go view, numpad 0, my camera. That's what it's going to look like. And you can see how I don't get that weird shadow anymore. Okay, so let's go back to N. I pulled up my numeric transform. I should have my lamp, my spot lamp allocated here or selected. And if I go back up, I can see that all the properties, all the locations for everything now. So I put my location for my lamp at around 5.6, 5.4, and 23. I'm going to make this so it's even. So we'll say 5.6, just to make it accurate. That'll be 5.4. Oops. And this will be 23.1. Now you might say, why 0.1? Because then it'll maintain the aspect that I want. From an angle rotation perspective, that's going to be interesting how we're going to accomplish that because it's in radians, right? And here we have angles or degrees, right? So Again, a minus maybe 0.8, right? And 19 degrees, so we're going to go to 19.5. And this one will be 42 points. Okay, 42.7. I just touched it. 42.7. There we go. So that's really the Euler angle for my rotation for X, Y, and Z. Notice how I can also choose quaternion, axis angle. I can choose all kinds of other rotation modes that can match more with things like Unity. All right. But this is cool. So I've got my light, and it's at this thing. Let's see if we can match it up with here in 3JS. So I'm going to go back to my light here. And this is kind of a little exercise for you guys to do. So my ambient light I'm not going to change. Let's leave it alone because it gives me kind of brightness to the scene. But my spot lamp, notice how my position set is way, way over here. And it's not like it looks at anything in my spot lamp. How do I set it up so that it, it looks where I want? So this is the X coordinate, if you notice, X coordinate, my Y coordinate, and my Z coordinate, X, Y, and Z, right? So remember my Y and my Z would have to be reversed, right? In this particular case. So if I go back, my X is 5.6, much closer, right? So X is 5.6, so a different angle too, right? Oops. And my my Y would be 23.1, 23.1, and my Z would be at 5.4. I don't have the other options yet. Let's see what that just doing this does. So I changed my light, kind of aligned it to what I see with Blender in terms of position, right? And let's see how it looks at the scene. So I'm going to kind of transpile there, and let's just go down here and reveal in Finder, or on your case on the Explorer window, and double click, and it should give me the light. Now take a look how darker it is, and see how the shadow went away, right? The shadow went away because I've moved my lamp away, so my shadow isn't there anymore. It's on the side, and it's pulled up back far enough so my brown color is more of the brown that I wanted, right? Matching more with Blender as opposed to the bright brown that I had before. The closer or farther away my light is, because remember, we can't, no light, no color, right? When I change my light position, right, then it changes the way my objects appear in terms of color, because color and light, if I want to light up a surface, it's going to be brighter. My color will come up brighter to me than this dull brown that I'm getting. Okay, there are some problems though, right? Don't have any shadows whatsoever, right? Number one, I only have this one. Where's this one coming from? The ambient light. That's where this one's coming from. And wherever my spotlight is right now, way up in the corner, on the top right corner over here somewhere. So I'm not getting the same shadow anymore. And I've pulled it out enough, right? I've pulled it up back enough so that way, but not too much back, so that I have, it encircles the entire platform, just like it would normally have, like this, right? What other options do I have with my light? Let's take a look. So I've got my set option, and we're going to talk about lighting in another chapter. But if I go spotlight, and this is where TypeScript comes into play, dot, and it's not position.set, what other things do I have? Cast shadow, channels, children. If I keep looking down here, right? Quaternion, right? Quaternion is like the angle, all right? I hate to say it that way. It's kind of a weird new word that some people would learn. Also rotation, right? So I've got my rotation. I'm going to rotate my thing. So if I go to rotation, because remember, all objects have position, rotation, and scale, right? So if a light's the same way, because a light comes from the whole object 3D superclass. That's the superclass for 3JS, right? And if I go dot set, right? And if I open it up, it tells me I need an X and Y and Z angle, and it returns a 3 Euler, right? And a Euler angle is it in radians? Right? Is it? A Euler angle, right? Or is it just in degrees, right? So if it's in degrees, I should be able to put in the angles just as we saw before, right? So let's try this out. Let's just put a number in here to match up the angles. So if I go back to Blender, I can see that the angle is minus 0.8. So we'll put that in. So minus 0.8. And then the next one is the Y angle, which remember even here the Y and the Y and the Z will be reversed, so it's 42.7. So 42.7. 0.7, and then the Y would be 19.5, or Z 19.5. There we go. So if I've done everything correctly, that's going to mess this right up. Let's see how messy this gets. I'm going to transpile. Notice how I do that every time, if I can remember. And now hopefully it'll refresh. I'll give it a sec and not crash. Okay, so no real change. You can't see any real change, right? But I've actually moved the light even further to where it's supposed to be. Now, here's something to check. If I go to inspect and I look at my console, I shouldn't see any errors. If I see an error in my console, that's a good understanding that we've got a problem, right? Here's something that does say to us, r3.webrenderer, that's what WebGL renderer, 7.3. What's 7.3? What does this mean here? 3 WebGL renderer 7.3. If I do my console.log, it's the version of my 3JS. So this is a good way of checking to see if you're like me. If you got some other number there, you're not using my boilerplate. You're using something else. So when we do our exam midterm, and I say, what's your version? And if I see some other version in there, like 6.7 or 7.1, well, then you're not using my boilerplate. Well, I'll know. All right, so again, this just follows a little console. I don't have to put any of this stuff in here on my console. It could be blank. This is just a good step to check to see if it's working there. Okay, cool. So I've got my scene, and it almost looks like, not quite, but it almost looks like my Blender scene. Notice how I have different kind of shaders that are at play here, and we're going to get to that in the course. We're going to get to the point where we can see some specularity, which is like reflectivity. That's what it means. And we're going to also see some other kinds of ways of how we can adjust our lights. Notice how our light is way up here, right? We can adjust our lights for more effect. And that's how we're seeing the colors that we're seeing. Also, I haven't touched my ambient light. I've left it alone, which is kind of whitewashing my scene a little bit. I could change my ambient light to do different things. All right, so that was all that I wanted to cover today in terms of without a UI control. Next day, what I want to do is get into finishing lesson 2 altogether, like that whole other part. Again, we're about a week or so behind in terms of total content. But we're going to catch up probably around week 12 and 13. We'll be right up with everything else. Because usually I leave a buffer of about a week or so at the end. So we're going to be our time scale is going to be just adjusted a touch. But you're going to have the stuff that you're going to get from me as it is. Right? Any questions around this stuff? What I did? One more thing before we go, and I was going to forget. Thank you. I'll save it. Thank you. One more thing is I'll save it, and then the next thing, I'll go here to changes, and I'll say updated king.ts for this one, and then I'm going to go here and push, and then you should have all my changes. Okay, what's that? Oh, it doesn't matter. I'd rather use the other boilerplate and wipe it out yourself, but you could if you wanted to. I'm okay with it. I'm giving you can use whatever boilerplate, whatever code you feel comfortable that you started working with online. If you start with this boilerplate and you want to use it for assignment number 1, I'm totally fine with it. And tomorrow, maybe something else you use as a starter point. Let's go back to this for a second. One more thing. There is another, other than Blender, there is another piece of code out there that you can take a look at, which is online. It's an online editor for 3JS. And if I click onto it, the address is 3js.org/editor. Notice like I was fooling around with it earlier. If I was to, and I just did this all in this little editor really quickly, notice how this isn't as robust, all right, as Blender. Like I can still turn around, I can still move around the screen with my left mouse button and so on. It's built in, it's an online editor, so if you don't have access to Blender, this can help you. It has some export features, but this exports into JSON objects, which won't help you. You can still use this because it's more accurate. It's a more accurate representation of what you're going to get because this is 3JS as opposed to Blender. You notice how there is the Y up and on everything else. You can certainly rotate the plane so it looks exactly how you're seeing it, like this right now. That's what you're looking at. Radiance. Yeah, so if I look through here, as an example, you can show the opacity and so on. You can create a new project. So if I say new, you can it'll kind of create a new project, and I can add things like a box in the middle of my scene, and I can create a very quick rendition of what the box is going to look like here. So if I go to Mesh, and notice how my position and my scale is 1, 1, 1, I can change this thing to match up what it's going to look like right away. So I'm showing it to you. Please, this is not going to help you from a code perspective. All it's going to do is give you a JSON object that you can import later on. We can't use it right now, is what I'm saying. And honestly, it's a very stripped down version of what we get with something like a Blender or Maya. I'd rather use Blender or Maya. But it's not bad. If you want to visualize again, and you want to do it quick, and you don't want to load up Blender, you can certainly use the 3JS editor that's online. Okay, so I wanted to leave you with that as another tool. I'll see you guys next day on Wednesday. Remember that we are going to start with our little quiz, which is going to be covering a little bit of what we've done today and some stuff we did last day. It's going to be with 2% of your final grades. Please be early. I will start exactly on time, right? Give or take a few minutes. You only have a couple minutes of grace. And then 10 minutes after, it's done. It'll lock. So you won't be able to do it anymore. Okay? Otherwise, see you next week, guys, or see you next day, guys. And hopefully this helped you in terms of getting your assignment 1 started.